Okay, thank you, everyone. Now we will go ahead and get started. The laws and regulations that will be referenced throughout this presentation and workshop can be found by navigating to our website. Throughout this presentation, you will see the image here at the bottom. You will see one of these images with either a CEC or a 5CCR. What this indicates is what section of our laws or regulations are being referred to in a particular slide. Should you need to look into it a little further, if you want to have a better understanding, you can find those by going over the Enforcement tab of our website, clicking on Laws and Regs, and there you will see the California Private Post-Secondary Education Act of 2009, and which is our law, and then our regulations are under Title 5, Division 7.5, California Code of Regulations, which is on your screen at the moment. The objectives for today. Today, we will be identifying reporting period requirements for your school performance fact sheets. Before I go any further, you'll see that we do call school performance fact sheets SPIFs. So you'll hear that term interchangeably throughout this presentation. We will identify format requirements for SPIFs. We will identify supporting documentation for SPIFs. We will identify required data for SPIFs, which will include on-time completion, job placement, license examination passage rates, salary and wage information, cost of educational programs, and federal student loan debt. We will also be identifying required information for your school performance fact sheets, which includes required disclosures, statements, and definitions. And lastly, we will cover situational information for school performance fact sheets. Your school performance fact sheet, what is it? It is a disclosure document, also known as a SPIFs, that assists prospective students in making an informed decision and selecting an educational program at a private post-secondary institution. What is its purpose? It provides prospective students with a reasonable perspective on the performance of an institution. Who completes it? All private post-secondary educational institutions that receive an approval to operate by the Bureau are required to complete SPIFs for each educational program offered in the reporting year. Your reporting requirements for your SPIF. Your SPIFs report data for the previous 2 calendar years. Your annual report and your SPIFs data is to be reported annually. Your annual report and your SPIFs data is reported to the Bureau as soon as August 1st of every year, but no later than December 1st of every year. For example, those are a lot of dates to remember. So the example that we can give you is a current one. During this reporting year of 2021, between August 1st and December 1st, you will be submitting an annual report that will report data for the 2020 calendar year. So your report that you submit now through December 1st is going to cover all of the data for 2020, which covers January 1st, 2020, all the way through December 31st, 2020. The SPIFs that you submit during this reporting year of 2021 will report data for the previous 2 calendar years, which is 2019 and 2020, which will cover January 1st, 2019, all the way to December 31st, 2020. The portal is open, by the way. It opened since we are in August. So you are able to start reporting your data now, and the due date is December 1st, 2021. Format requirements for your SPIFs. The format for each SPIF shall be in at least 12-point font with 1.15 line spacing. Your column headings and titles need to be in bold 14-point font. Separate SPIFs shall be prepared for each educational program for the main and each branch location, including satellites. Your SPIFs are to include only information specifically required or permitted by the Act or regulation. On this last note, something that I failed to mention in the beginning is we did get a question about waiving certain reporting requirements due to COVID during 2020. Unfortunately, the SPIF's regulations are very specific. So they do require and only permit very specific information. So omitting information is not permitted. Now, before we get any further into school performance fact sheets, we can't really talk about them and the data that you need to include in them without talking about supporting documentation, also sometimes known as backup docs. And this is basically the information that you collect, information that you are required to collect, and they essentially serve as the foundation for your school performance fact sheets. And this will become clear when we do the workshop portion of our presentation. In order to go ahead and get into that portion, I am going to go ahead and throw it over to Jennifer Jones, who will go ahead and go over this very important section with us.
Thank you, Chrisia.
Thank you.
I'm Jennifer Jones, the lead analyst for the annual report unit. And as Chrisia said, I'll be speaking about the supporting documentation. So what is the supporting documentation? It's documentation supporting all data, and it shall be maintained electronically by the institution for at least 5 years from the last date the data was included in either an annual report or a performance fact sheet. Documentation supporting the following data must be made available to the Bureau upon request. List of job classifications, student information, graduate information, self-employment information, employer information, description of attempts. And that means we request that you make at least 3 attempts to contact the student and or employer. Licensing examination information, unavailable student or graduate information, and institutional representative information. And we're going to go into detail in each one of these as we go through the presentation. Student information. Supporting documentation for student information shall include student's name, address, phone number, email address, program completed, program start date, scheduled completion date, which is a very important part of your supporting documentation, your actual completion date, your graduate's actual completion date, which is also a very important part of your supporting docs, and a description of all attempts to contact each student. Now, when we say description of attempts to contact, that's whether you sent an email, a letter, a phone call. You must have that documentation in your student file. If you were unable to contact your student or the employer upon your first attempt, then you must we request that you make at least 3 attempts in contacting the student. Okay. Graduate employment information. Supporting documentation for graduate employment information shall include place of employment and position, date employment began, date employment ended, if applicable, actual salary, hours per week, date employment verified, and again, description of all attempts to contact employer. That's 3 attempts and documentation of it. So if you make a phone call, write it on a Post-it on Thursday, June 5th at 3 o'clock, phone employer, no answer, or phone employer spoke to Jim. That's the documentation we're referring to when we say the supporting documentation of your attempts to contact. In the employer information, supporting documentation for employer verification information shall include employer address, employer general phone number, employer contact person phone number and email, all written communication with employer verifying employment or salary, and again, description of all attempts to contact employer. For those graduates who gain self-employment, the supporting documentation for self-employment information shall include any and all documents demonstrating self-employment, such as a business license, fictitious business name statement, advertising, anything other than a business card. We don't accept business cards. We'll accept a website or business receipts or other evidence of income from business, or an attestation signed by the graduate of self-employment or freelance work and dated after graduation. Unavailable students / graduates. Supporting documentation for each student determined to be unavailable for graduation or employment shall include the identity of the student, the type of unavailability, and that means whether they were unavailable for graduation or unavailable for employment, dates of unavailability, and documentation of unavailability. And we'll go into the documentation type for unavailability later in our presentation. Additional information, the institution shall maintain documentation supporting data for the following. Documentation used to support license examination results would be a copy of the license or examination results received either from the student or the licensing agency. A list of job classifications determined to be considered gainful employment for the educational program. That would be your standard occupational codes. That's what we're referring to, which we'll go also into later in the presentation. Institutional representative. The following information for the institution's representative who was primarily responsible for obtaining students' completion, placement, licensing, salary, and wage data, the date the information was gathered, and copies of letters, notes, or emails through which the information was requested and gathered. The name of the representative, email address, phone number, position, and/or title. So this concludes the supporting documentation portion of our presentation. I'm going to switch it back over to Chrisia.
Thank you, Jennifer. Now, in the materials that you downloaded during the registration process, you should have gotten a SPIFS sample, which is on your screen at the moment. The content in this sample doesn't include everything because remember, depending on your school, different sections apply, but this sample is given to you so that you can see the format, the column headers, the way it should be presented, the way it should look essentially, but it also gives you a good idea of what we'll be talking about throughout this presentation. If on our slides at the top, for example, as you see now, it says SPIFS 1, then you would know to look at your sample and look at the page that has SPIFS 1 on it. We are going to go ahead and start with the very top, which is on-time completion rates. We will go from on-time completion rates to then the 150 table. And Natasha is going to go ahead and start us off with that. So if you want to follow along, you may do so.
Thank you, Christia. Hello, everyone. My name is Natasha Ford. I'm one of the analysts here in the annual reports unit. And I'm going to talk about the on-time completion rate table. So now that we have somewhat of an understanding of our backup data, we're going to now basically put together these school performance fact sheets. So let's go to the next slide and look at the table. All right, so starting from the top, you will see the title, which shall reflect on-time completion rates. Below that, it states includes data for 2 calendar years prior to reporting. And underneath that, you shall provide the name of the educational program offered. And what we're referring to is basically the name that of the program that was approved by the Bureau from the licensing unit, in addition to the program length. So make sure that is there. Starting from the left-hand side, you'll notice that the first column has calendar years. So it will reflect 2 calendar years of data. Moving on to the second column, you have number of students who began the program. Third column is students available for graduation. Fourth column is number of on-time graduates, and your fifth column is the on-time completion rate. Within the next few slides, I'm going to go ahead and break down each column to help you understand what they mean. All right, so number of students who began the program means the number of students who began the program who were scheduled to complete the program within 100% of the published program length within the reporting calendar year, and excludes all students who canceled during the cancellation period. And the cancellation period is the first day of class or 7 days after the enrollment agreement is signed, or whichever is later. Students available for graduation. This is the number of students who began the program minus the number of students who have passed away, been incarcerated, or called to active military duty. Number of on-time graduates. This is a number of students who completed the program within 100% of the published program length within the reporting calendar year. So they will complete before or within the scheduled time. And how do you get your rate? Your on-time completion rate is the number of on-time graduates divided by the number of students available for graduation. And note that the on-time completion rate is reported as a percentage and will never go over 100%. So let's take a look at the completed table to see what it looks like. So starting from the top, we have our title, on-time completion rates. We have the information below that telling you it includes 2 calendar years of data. And if you want to go along with this is on SPIF's page 1, where my pointer is pointing at, SPIF's page 1. You have the on-time completion rates title. It states it includes data for 2 calendar years prior to reporting. We have the name of the program and include the hours of the program, which is the program length. And that could be weeks, years, months, but whatever you were approved for, you need to make sure that you have that program length there. Starting from the left-hand side of the table, you have your calendar years. So we're working with 2019 and 2020. I'm not going to get into the numbers of the table. We'll be going over that later on, but this, just to show you a completed table is what it looks like. So you have your number of students who began in your second column. Third column, you have your students available for graduation. Your fourth column, you have your number of on-time graduates. And your fifth column, you have your on-time completion rate. Now below this, you need to make sure that you have your student acknowledgement. So that's the student initials and date, and then the verbatim sentence that states that the student shall only initial after they have had sufficient time to read and understand this information. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So let's take a look at this table. This table is definitely a benefit. This is the 150% table, which can also be found on page 1 of the school performance fact sheet example that we provided. So the 150 table is optional. So reporting the 150% completion data table is optional, and it does not have to be used, and it can be used on whatever program you would like to use it on. To determine your 150% students, you take your program length and you multiply that by 1.5, and that will give you your 150%. So let me give you an example. For an 8-month program, the 150% table would allow reporting for 12 months. And we'll go into that later on in the workshop to kind of give you more of an example of what that looks like. So as you can see, starting at the top of this table, you have the program name and program length. On the left-hand side of this table, you'll notice that we have 4 years here. So if your programs are more than 1 year in length, you need to provide 4 years of calendar data. So if it's more than a year in length, you need to provide 4 years. If it's not, then you'll just provide the 2. Okay. So the second column on this table, we have the number of students who began the program. Now that number of students who began the program is the same number of students that were in your on-time completion rate table. That number does not change. So you're still working with that same cohort. Moving on to the third column, students available for graduation. You're still working with the same students that were in the on-time completion rate table. That number is not changing on this table here. So then the fourth column is your 150 graduates. And then the last column is the 150 completion rate. And in the next slide, I'm going to break down what that means. So your 150 graduates. This is the number of students who completed the program within 150% of the published program length. And this shall include the on-time graduates. And the 150% completion rate. This is the number of students who completed the program in the reporting calendar year within 150% of the published program length, which includes your on-time graduates divided by the number of students available for graduation. So let's take a look and see what this table looks like completed. So starting from the top of the table, we have the name of the program and we have the program hours. This program has 2 years of data, so we have our calendar years of 2019, 2020. Second column, number of students who began the program, still working with those same number of students from the on-time table. Third column, students available for graduation. We're still working with the same number of students that we had in the on-time completion rate table. The fourth column, we have our 150% graduates. So this was your on time plus your 150. And then the rate, we understand how we determine the rate, which you can see here, we have a higher rate. Now below this table, once again, you need to make sure that you have your student acknowledgement. Now let's take a look at the next slide and I'm going to show you a comparison. So of course, these are still the 2 years. Let's look at the second columns. As you can see, number of students who began the program, we have the same data. So we're still working with the same number of students. Third column, students available for graduation, same data, still same number of students. Fourth column is where you're going to see the change. So you had your on-time graduates, as you can see the data there. And then when you look at the 150% graduates, the number is higher because it includes your on time plus your 150. So when you look at the rate for the on time, we'll go back up to the top. We had a 55, let's just talk about 2019. We had a 55% rate, right? Now, if we go down to 2019 for the 150, we had a 91%. So there's a benefit to using this table. And you can explain that to a student that say, even though they didn't complete within 100%, they were able to complete within 150, giving the program rate of 150%, a 91% completion rate, 150 completion rate. So there's definitely a benefit, but remember it is an option. So let's go to the next slide. Now that we have everyone graduated, we now want to talk about job placement. And just so we have an understanding of what job placement is, it means that after a student completes your program, they're able to basically be employed in the field. So we're going to go ahead and discuss that in the next slide. So if we look at the top, we have our title in this. If you want to follow along on the SPIFS example that we have, it's on page 2. But we're going to start from the title, which shows job placement rates. Below that, it tells you that it includes data for 2 calendar years prior to reporting. You have the name of your program and your program length. Starting from the left-hand side of the table, you have your 2 calendar years. Second column, you have your number of students who began the program. So we're still working with those same students that we started out with our on time. That number does not change. Third column, you have your number of graduates. Fourth column, you have your graduates available for employment. Fifth column, graduates employed in the field. Sixth column is the placement rate for employed in the field. Now, just so you have an understanding of how this is measured, placement is measured 6 months from the graduation date of each student or within 6 months after the results of the first examination available after graduation. So we're going to go to the next slide and break down each table, each column. So number of graduates. This is the number of graduates. This is the number of students who began the program and have been awarded a degree or diploma or certificate and receive that in that reporting year. So graduates available for employment. Everybody is going to be available for employment unless they're considered unavailable. And they would be unavailable if after graduation they pass away, become incarcerated, they're called to active military duty, are international students that leave the United States or do not have a visa allowing employment in the United States, or are continuing their education in an accredited or bureau approved post-secondary institution. Graduates employed in the field. So this means graduates who beginning within 6 months after a student completes the applicable educational program, they are gainfully employed. Their employment has been reported and for whom the institution has documented verification of employment. For occupants for which the state requires passing an examination, this 6-month period begins after the announcement of the examination results for the first examination available after a student completes the applicable educational program. Okay. And then the rate. The rate is calculated by dividing the number of graduates gainfully employed in the field by the number of graduates available for employment. All right, let's take a look at this table fully completed. So starting from the top, we have our title, job placement rates, the verbatim sentence below that. We have our program name with the program hours. Starting from the left-hand side, we have our 2 calendar years. In the second column, you have your number of students who began the program. And as you can see, we still are working with the students that were in our on time as well as in our 150. So we're still working with the same number of students. Number of graduates. We have that there. We have graduates available for employment, graduates employed in the field, which gives us our rate. One of the most important things that you need to have underneath this table is a verbatim statement. So what it's stating here is you may obtain from the institution a list of employment positions determined to be in the field for which a student received education and training. So what that is basically those standard occupational codes. Basically, if a student wants to know where they can obtain that information, where it says insert how a student can obtain this information, do not leave insert how they can obtain this information. We want you, the institution, to provide a phone number, a person of contact, the register, basically letting a student know how they can obtain that employment list. All right, so we are going to go to our gainfully employed section. Now that everybody's employed in the field, we need to figure out where they fall into those gainfully employed categories. So a graduate is considered gainfully employed if they fall within one of the following. So let's talk about the first one. Employed in a job classification under the United States Department of Labor Standard Occupational Classification Codes, so the SOC codes. And very important here, so they are employed under the SOC code and in a single position or concurrent aggregated position. So that means working at one job or working 2 jobs at the same time. And it says totaling at least 30 hours per week for 5 weeks, which is 35 calendar days, or totaling at least 20 hours per week for 5 weeks for 35 calendar days if certain conditions are met. Now, these days do not have to be consecutive days. And when we speak to if certain conditions are met, that means if the student chose to seek part-time rather than full-time, they need to provide a statement indicating that they chose to seek part-time employment rather than full-time. So that's the first one. Second one is by the same employer that employed the graduate before enrollment and certain conditions are met. Now, if you want to know what those certain conditions are, you see where that little gavel is on the lower right-hand side of the screen here. You can find that information under the codes there. There's a lot of codes, but you can, that's where you can find where the certain conditions are met. Okay. The third one is the graduate is self-employed or working freelance with reasonable evidence. All right. So now that we understand what gainfully employed is, we're going to show you how that will look on the table. So this is on page 2 of your SPIFS example. First, I want to start off with the right-hand side of this table. Can we do that? Let's talk about the right-hand side. Total graduates employed in the field. As you can see, we've identified 4 for 2019 and 6 for 2020. In all of these gainfully employed tables that I'm going to be reviewing for you, you shall see the same number of students that shows total graduates employed in the field, because we are not adding up students from left and right in this table. You already identified total graduates employed in the field. If we can go back to the job placement table, we identified that in our job placement table, graduates employed in the field. We had 4 and 6. Okay. So if we go back to the gainfully employed tables, you're going to see always on the right-hand side underneath the column, total graduates employed in the field, that number is always going to be 4 and 6. All right. So let's start with the first table, part-time versus full-time employment. You have your 2 calendar years. The second column is graduates employed in the field working 20 to 29 hours per week. So that's your part-time. You identify that. The third column is your graduates employed in the field at least working 30 hours per week. So that's your full-time. Going down to the second table, you have your single position versus concurrent aggregated position. You're still working with 2 calendar years. The second column is graduates employed in the field in a single position. So that means they're working 1 position. And then the second column is graduates are employed in the field in a concurrent aggregated position. So that means they're working 2 jobs in the same field. So these tables tie together because what you're identifying is a student. If we look at the top table, part-time versus full-time employment, we show that we had 4 students who were working go to the third column, graduates employed in the field at least working 30 hours per week. So we identified 4 students working 30 hours per week. And then if we went down to the second table, the single position versus concurrent aggregated table, we identified that those 4 graduates were working in 1 position. So these 2 tables go together, and we'll explain that in the workshop. So let's go to the next column tables. So we have self-employed working freelance calendar years. We have 2019, 2020. We do not, the second column states graduates employed who are self-employed or working freelance. We do not have any supporting documents that tell us that we have any students employed in those areas. So that's why you see 0. The last column is the total graduates employed in the field. So as I explained before, that was identified in the job placement table, and we identified 4 and 6 for those reporting years. If you look below that, if the majority of your students are working self-employed and freelance, you shall have the following underneath this table. It is a verbatim statement with bullet points that are included. Basically, it's saying this program may result in freelance or self-employment, and you shall have all of these bullet points underneath that table if the majority of your students are working self-employed or freelance. In addition to that, you need to have the student initials, date, and the acknowledgement. The last table is institutional employment. So they're working, so for this one, we have the 2 calendar years. In the middle column, we don't have any supporting documentation, so that's why you see 0 there. And then the last column is the total graduates employed in the field, which we identified as 4 and 6. In addition to that, you have your student initials, date, and the verbatim statement saying that they shall initial only after they fully understand what is being provided on this table. All right. We are done with this
So everyone, I
section.
do think we have some questions. If you have any questions regarding all of the sections that have been covered so far, which include on-time completion and job placement, you can go ahead and ask them now. Even if your question is about the previous section, which was supporting docs, or the very beginning, You can send your questions through the chat box, or you can raise your hand. If you give me a second, I will start going through the chat box because I do see some questions.
Mhm.
Will a recording of this workshop be available? Yes, we are recording the workshop now, and we will make that available shortly. Will we get a copy of these slides? The material that you downloaded included the slides with some area for you to make notes. But if you want the full slides, like without any notes area, just send us a quick email and we'll send over the full slides. How do you suggest we gather this information? With a form that we send to students, how have people best gathered this information?
Actually, the Bureau doesn't have anything in regulation to direct you as to how to collect the information. It is your responsibility to ensure that you do collect the information. I know that some schools do surveys, so you may want to check with other institutions to determine how they do it, but yeah, we don't have anything in regulation to direct you as to how to collect the information, unfortunately.
I do know, just to add, I have seen where, some schools will have, like JJ said, a survey that they send out. Some schools also have, I believe they, like admissions directors, that kind of track all this information from beginning to end. But I have seen, or some compliance positions or compliance directors that will, to ensure compliance with laws and regs, they'll go ahead and have, someone that tracks and collects this information. Another question that we got was, do you have templates for us? A template of the school performance fact sheet is on our website and you can download it. I believe we have a Word version that you can fill in. And then we also have a PDF version. Just keep in mind that when you do submit your school performance fact sheets, if you use the Word version, you will have to convert it to a PDF and upload it as a single document.
Mhm.
Next question, if a graduate passes, this looks like a license exam question. I'm going to skip it just because we do have a license examination passage rate section. And if we do not answer your question then we'll go ahead and have you submit your question again.
Chrissia,
Yes.
this person did talk about COVID, and I think you addressed that before because they said, is BPPE making any accommodation on licensure and placement?
Oh, the answer to that, unfortunately, is no, but that is simply due to the fact that our regulations are very specific about what we can and cannot do when it comes to school performance fact sheets. And making accommodations, if you mean waiving or allowing you to not report that information, that is not the case. Those concerns were, they have been brought to the attention of the chief. And they were brought to her consideration, but for now, you are expected to report that information. The next question is, what if they are self-employed and working for someone else? Do we note under each column?
Yeah, you can provide them for each column as long as you have the supporting documentation. You can.
The next question is, what do we do if the student doesn't want to answer a question?
I think Jennifer, you described what they can do for supporting docs.
Yes, you will document that you made an attempt to contact the student. If the student refused to answer the question, then you'll note that in your attempt to contact the student.
There was a comment from another school that to someone's question about how to obtain that information. They said they use email, they call the student, they message the students through Slack and sometimes through LinkedIn. For the next question is, for the self-employed graduates, what is the best supporting document to collect?
As listed in the supporting documentation, you can use a fictitious business name, license, income receipts, website, anything except a business card. Also assign attestation from the student or the graduate stating they chose self-employment. So there are options that you can use to verify their self-employment.
Thank you, JJ.
Mhm.
And you're welcome, Wendy. I got your thank you. I don't see any hands raised at this moment. Give me 1 second to double check. I do see a hand. Yvonne, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you and then you can ask your question.
We are wondering if underneath the self-employed section, would a social media page be sufficient as a website?
Yes, we will accept Facebook page, Instagram page. Again, anything other than a business card, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay.
Yvonne, if you'll lower your hand the same way you raised it, that way it'll clear you. Thank you so much. And then I did see another question come through.
My chat's not working.
Your chats where you should address sending those over in the email after you send that question. Just
Yeah,
not responding back.
in my email, check my junk.
Maybe they'll send it at the end.
Maybe.
Next question is, can we include a student as employed if they verbally tell us they are employed and it is on their LinkedIn, but they will not follow up with us?
You would need, that's a good question. We'll accept it for self-employment as their advertisement for as being self-employed. But to verify the hours or the salary, you would need sufficient supporting documentation to verify the salary earned or the hours worked.
Next question is, we offer one FT and PR program 3 ways: in-person, live remote, and hybrid. Due to COVID, we offered one training option, live remote. When submitting SPIFs for these programs, do we note this since total or for all?
I would have to see how it's approved by licensing. So you can, Claudia, you can send me an email, send it to the annual reports unit, and then I'll take a look at that and I can give you that answer.
And Claudia, that email will be the last slide at the end of our presentation, and I'll make sure to point it out.
Mhm.
With that, I do not see any more hands, nor do I see anything in the chat. So we will go ahead and move on. The next section we will be covering is the license examination passage rates, and that will be done by Jennifer Jones.
Thank you, Christia. So for the licensing examination portion, the Bureau requires that the examinations are reported in one of 2 ways, either continuously administered or not continuously administered, sorry. The most common way is the continuously administered. This is going to be for your LVNs, your Barbara Cosmos, your phlebotomists, anything that's offered on a daily, monthly, or weekly basis. And we're going to go over the table as to how it should be set up. So here on your screen, you'll see the header, license examination passage rates. Again, the includes data for 2 calendar years prior to reporting, the name of the educational program, the program length, and starting from the left, the calendar year, number of graduates in calendar year, which I'm going to go over each one of these as we go along, number of graduates taking exam, number who passed first available exam, number who failed first available exam, and then lastly, the passage rate. So if we go into the next slide, we'll talk about your number of graduates in the calendar year. Okay, the number of graduates in the calendar year is the number of students who began the program and were awarded a diploma, degree, or certificate in that reported calendar year. So these are anyone who was scheduled to complete in the reported calendar year. They missed your on time, they missed the 150, but they still completed in their scheduled year, and it's in the reporting year. Okay, for example, you had someone who was scheduled to complete June 1st. They missed the on time. They didn't make it to the 150, but they did complete later in the year. And it's your reporting calendar year, so you can count that person here under number of graduates in the calendar year. The next column is the number of graduates taking the exam, is the number of graduates who took the first available exam in the reported calendar year. What's the first available exam? It's the first exam offered to your student by the licensing agency. If you have students who sign up themselves, then it's going to be the first date that your student signs up for. If your student does not take the first available exam offered, your student cannot be counted under number of graduates taking the first available exam. They will fall off. Okay, so if your student was scheduled to take the exam for February 2nd, and they decided not to take the exam until March 3rd, they're not counted. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Number who passed first available exam is the number of graduates who took and passed the first available licensing exam after completing the program. Again, this is based upon the first available exam. Number who failed exam is the number of graduates who took and failed the first available licensing exam after completing the program. Again, it's all based upon them taking the first available exam. The passage rate is calculated by dividing the number of graduates who passed the exam by the number of graduates who took the reported licensing exam. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. And this is how your table should look. The licensing exam passage rates is the header with the 2 years prior header underneath. The name of the program as approved by the Bureau, along with the hours as approved by the Bureau. Starting from the left, you'll have your calendar years, your number of graduates in the calendar year, your number of graduates taking the exam, number who passed first available exam, number who failed first available exam, and your passage rate. Below the table, you'll have the verbatim statement. Licensing exam passage data is not available from the state agency administering the examination. We were unable to collect data from the number of graduates that you were unable to collect data from. So if you had 10 students and you were unable to collect data from 5 of those students, you'll indicate 5 there. If you were able to collect data from all of your graduates, you'll just list 0 here, but you must list something in those parentheses there. And then below that, you'll have the student initials and date and the statement that they had sufficient time to read and understand the information. Okay. Now, for those programs that are not continuously administered examinations, this would be for your attorneys taking the bar, dental hygienists, your CPAs, certified public accountants, whose examinations are offered only 2 to 3 times per year. In these cases, you're going to list the specific date that your graduate took the exam. And next column, you're going to have the date the exam results were announced, and number of graduates in the calendar year, number of graduates taking the exam. Again, it's still based upon the first available exam, number who passed exam, number who failed exam, and the passage rate. Okay. So let's look at the slide. The first available exam again is the date the first exam available after a student completed the applicable educational program. The date exam results announced is the announcement of the examination results for the first examination available after a student completed the applicable educational program. So again, you're listing specific dates instead of the year. Let's go to the next slide. Number who passed exam is number of graduates who passed the first available exam after graduation on their first attempt. Has to be on the first attempt. Number who failed exam is the number of graduates who failed the first exam available after graduation on their first attempt. The passage rate is calculated by dividing the number of graduates who passed the exam by the number of graduates who took the reported licensing exam. Now note, for those graduates who don't pass on the first attempt, you may add a column that reports the data for graduates who took and passed the exam after initially failing the exam, but only the column that says the number who passed. You cannot add a passage rate for those graduates who didn't initially pass the exam. Okay. And this is what table should look like for your not continuously administered. You're going to have a specific date here as listed from the left, the first available exam date, and then the date the exam results were announced with a specific date, your number of graduates in the calendar year, your number of graduates taking the exam, the number who passed the exam, and the number who failed the exam, along with the passage rate. And again, it's still based upon the first available exam. And below that table, you'll have the required verbatim statement regarding the license passes examination data is not available from the state agency. We were unable to collect data from the number of graduates. Again, with the student's initial and date, and that they've had sufficient time to read and understand the information in this table. Okay. Now, for those programs that do not require a state licensing exam, such as your massage therapist, you will still include the table in your SPIFs. You'll just have the table with the header, this program does not require state licensure. You'll still have all the headers within the table, and you'll indicate NA in each field that's applicable to the program. And this is what your table should look like for those programs that do not require state licensure in order for your graduate to gain employment. All right. So now that your student is licensed and earning an income, let's talk about the salary and wage information. So the salary and wage information shall be reported as this table is listed here. You'll have the header here, salary and wage information, salary and data for 2 calendar years, the name of the educational program and program length. And then there's the header below that that says annual salary and wages reported for graduates employed in the field. Starting from the left, you'll have the calendar year. Graduates available for employment, that's going to be the same number that was in your job placement table. And next table is the graduates employed in the field, which is also the same number that's in your job placement field. You're just going to bring that data over to this table. Then you're going to have your salaries listed. They're required to be listed in $5,000 increments. You're only required to report the salaries that actually apply, so you don't have to go 5, 10, 15, 20. You're only required to list the actual salaries that apply to your graduates. Okay, you're allowed to skip. You can add and remove columns as needed. The last column that says no salary information reported, that means if you were unable to make a contact with your graduate after making reasonable attempts, those are the three attempts that we request you make, and you were unable to obtain the salary information, you'll list that here. So if you made attempts to contact 10 students and you got data from 6 of those students and 4 you were unable to contact, you'll list 4 under the no salary information reported for those graduates that you were unable to contact. Okay. SPIFs require a statement informing the reader where he or she may obtain from the institution a list of objective sources of information used to substantiate the salary disclosure. So on the next slide, you'll see that this is a verbatim statement that has to be under your salary and wage table. And this is how your salary and wage table should look with the header, the name of the program, and again, the verbatim statement below it. And please make sure you insert how the student may obtain that information. A list of sources used to substantiate salary disclosure is available from the schools, whether it's your registrar, your career counselor, secretary, whomever they may contact to obtain the information. Those sources used to obtain this information, whether you got the data from EDD, if you refer them to a website, that's fine too, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, INET, wherever you got the data from, that's what needs to be listed there. Below that is the student initials and date, and again, the statement that they've had sufficient time to read and understand the information displayed in the SPIFs. Now, some of the required statements that are required to be in your SPIF are the cost of educational program. The cost of educational program should include the following information: that the total charges for a student to complete the program within 100% of the program length. You'll include a disclosure that there may be additional charges if the program is not completed on time. The information can be disclosed in a format substantially similar to the example below. So you have to have 2 years of costs. So for this reporting year, you're going to have 2020 and 2019. And this is the format that it should be in. So the first one could be the 2019 year, and below that is the 2020 year. And the cost of that. And it should be the total charges, that's including books, equipment, tuition, anything that's going to be a charge to your student should be included in this cost of educational program. Okay. And you can look at page 4 of your SPIFs if you want to see the example of what that looks like. Are there any questions on the sections we just went through?
Thank you, JJ.
Mhm.
Okay. If you have any questions about the sections that JJ just covered, when it comes to licensing, salary and wage information, and cost of educational program, you can send that through the chat box. I'll give it a minute or so to see if something trickles in. And I do see a hand, so I'll go ahead and
Christia,
yes.
one of the Yuto Navarrete, they asked a question about the licensing exam at 10:53.
Oh, right. Okay, let me go back to it. And here we go. If a graduate passes their license exam on their second attempt, will the graduate be able to be placed if the second exam date was 6 months after the results first exam date was announced? Many graduates were not able to get their exams scheduled or rescheduled due to State Board being closed from COVID. Is BPPE making any accommodation in licensure and placement? I think we answered the second part of that question.
Yeah, we
I
did.
don't know if that changes the first part, right?
But
Because
it-
I think does it?
But it does, because they're saying if a graduate passes their license exam on their second attempt, and Jennifer, you said it's their first attempt, correct?
It is their first attempt that it's counted.
So they're not, if they don't pass, so I guess your question is, will the graduate be eligible to be placed if the second exam date was 6 months?
Okay. This, if they can email this question to us so that we can look into it instead of now,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
Okay. Okay, Yuto, if you, at the end of this presentation, which is in just a few slides, we'll have emails and you can go ahead and send your specific question to us so that we make sure we get you the right information. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Crystal.
Hi, this might be a tech question about the template. I found the SPIFS template, and as I'm trying to enter information, it only has a certain set of boxes lit up. So for example, if I went to the cost of the program and I wanted to enter it there, it says XX, XXX. It's not letting me change those X's to the cost of the program. Do you have a suggestion? Again, this might be like an answer of like, open it in a different file or Word. So anybody else have this kind of issue? And
You're using the PDF one? Did you click on PDF or Word?
I thought I clicked on Word. Okay, so it does say PDF. Okay, so
yeah.
would you be willing to put in the chat for everybody the link to the proper document, Word document?
Christia?
Totally. I can do it at the end just because I'm sharing a screen right now and it'll kind of cause a mess, but absolutely, yes. I can go ahead and at the end, while we're taking a break in between the first and second portion, I can go ahead and put the link in the chat box. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so
Alright.
much.
Thank you, Crystal. Okay, I don't see any more hands raised and I don't see anything in the chat box. So we're going to go ahead and get into the federal student loan debt section or portion, I should say. That will be covered by Natasha.
All right, so we're going to talk about the federal student loan debt section. So if your institution participates in Title IV funding, the SPIF shall include the following information if you participate. So the first bullet point is the most recent 3-year cohort default rate reported by the United States Department of Education. The second item is the percentage of enrolled students receiving federal student loans. The third one is the average amount of federal student loan debt of graduates in that reporting year. And the last one is the percentage of graduates with federal student loans as calculated by the institution. So we will like this information in the following format. You will see the next slide here. So this can be found on page 5 of the SPIFS example that we provided. But what you'll need is the federal student loan debt title, as you can see. And starting from the left-hand side, you're still working with your 2 calendar years. So you want to make sure that you have 2 calendar years of reporting. The second column is the cohort rate. So the cohort rate is going to be the most recent one. So for 2020, we just want the 2020 cohort default rate. We don't need 2 years. We want the most recent one. The third column is the percentage of enrolled students receiving federal student loans to pay for this program. As you can see, this column is specifically tied to the program. So we want to know information regarding the program. The fourth column is the percentage of graduates in the reporting years who took out federal student loans to pay for this program. So this one is program related as well. The last one is related to the institution. So it states the average amount of federal student loan debt of the reporting years, graduates who took out federal student loans at this institution. So you're providing institution data. The two is specific to the program. And then you have your cohort and then your reporting years. Underneath the table is a verbatim paragraph. So basically you just leave that statement there. And then underneath that paragraph, you have the student initials, date, and then the verbatim statement saying that they've had enough time to fully understand what is being provided on this table. We're going to go to the next slide and take a look and see how you're going to report it if you don't offer funding. So the SPIF shall include the following if your institution does not participate in federal financial aid programs. So the first statement states that students you provide the name of your institution, are not eligible for federal student loans. The institution does not meet the U.S. Department of Education criteria that would allow its students to participate in federal student aid programs. That is a verbatim statement there. You do not change that. So what you'll notice on the template, we say or. Please do not leave both of these and leave or, because that can be confusing. You are identifying under here either if you are not eligible to participate, or your institution is eligible but chooses not to participate in federal student aid programs. So the students here do not have federal student loans. So that we want you to choose one of these statements. That's why the or is there. And then once you've selected one of these statements, you need to make sure that it's accompanied by the student acknowledgement, the student initials, date, and the verbatim statement underneath that. So let's go to the next slide. The required information. You can turn to page 6 of the SPIF's example that we provided, because it's probably better to see it that way. But the institution shall provide a prospective student with a SPIFs containing the following statements. So these two paragraphs here are verbatim. So it's basically the first paragraph tells them that the fact sheet is filed with the Bureau, and if they have any questions related to this information, it will basically give them an address and our phone number to contact as well. So they're verbatim paragraphs, do not change them. And number 6, the page 6 of the school performance fact sheet example that we provided shows you that you have to have the signature lines under there as well. Going on to the next one, if you look at pages 7 and 8 of your SPIFs example, you're going to see a total of 16 definitions. So the following is a list of terms whose definitions need to be included on your SPIFs. Please do not remove any of them. Even if the table doesn't apply, you still need to have these 16 definitions, because those definitions identify what the column means. So if a student is like, what does number of students who began the program mean? They can go to these definitions and it will let them know what it means. So please make sure that you have a total of 16 definitions on your school performance fact sheets. And the next slide is the required, the cancellation disclosure. So an institution shall provide on a separate document, and you can see this on page 9. So basically it's like the last page. You don't want it running in with anything else on your school performance fact sheets. So it's the same cancellation disclosure that is required to be included with the enrollment agreement. The separate document shall be substantially the same size as the school performance fact sheet and shall be captioned students' right to cancel using bold 14-point type. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it back to Jennifer.
Thank you, Natasha. I'm going to talk about the situational information. The situational information applies only if the situation applies to your institution. The first one is out-of-state prospective students. So an institution is not required to provide a SPIF to a prospective student who is not a California student not residing in California at the time of enrollment if an accredited institution that offers a program that is accredited, a degree program, and offered as distant learning, and complies with all federal laws applicable to the state where the student is located and other appropriate laws, including but not limited to consumer protection and student disclosure requirements. And you can find that information here listed below under 94909 of the California Educational Code D. Okay. This disclosure, whether the data information or both excludes these students, you may not actively include this data to recruit as recruitment materials or other recruitment efforts of students who are not California residents and do not reside in California at the time of their enrollment. So basically, if you have out-of-state students at the time of enrollment, you must disclose whether this information excludes these students, and you may not use this material as recruitment efforts in an effort to recruit out-of-state students. Clear as mud. New programs, new schools. This statement is used for any new institution or new program who doesn't have data, 2 full years of data to report in their SPIF. And the statement states, if a program is too new to provide data for completion rates, placement rates, licensing exam passage rates, and/or salary and wage information, and the institution shall include the following information on its SPIFs. This program is new, therefore the number of students who graduate, the number of students who are placed, or the starting salary you can earn after finishing the educational program are unknown at this time. Information regarding general salary and placement statistics may be available from government sources or from the institution, but is not equivalent to actual performance data. You must include the date the program began and the estimated date of availability for 2 full years of data. And this statement can go on page 1 of your SPIFs, and this is how it should look if listed under the on-time completion table. Again, you must include the date the program began and the date in which you anticipate to have 2 full years of data. Okay. Are there any questions on this section?
That actually concludes the first portion of our presentation that has to do with an overall view of school performance fact sheets. If you have any questions about the few sections that were covered just for this, you can go ahead and either raise your hand or shoot it through the chat box. I'll give it about a minute to see if anything comes through. Okay, I don't see any coming through, so I'll go ahead and continue. Just some closing remarks about website requirements. An institution that maintains a website shall provide on the homepage of, of that website clear and conspicuous links to all of the items required in section 94913 subdivision A, which includes a school catalog, a SPIFs for each educational program offered by the institution, student brochures offered by the institution, a link to the Bureau's internet website, and the institution's most recent annual report submitted to the Bureau. Lastly, a few individuals throughout the presentation, we did direct you to email us. You can do that here to the ARU general inbox. It is monitored daily, and you can send your question there. The annual report unit team is made up of the individuals listed right in that box. If you want to get a hold of any of us individually, you can do so. And that concludes the first portion. Now, before we take a break, we are going to take about a 10-minute break. We will get into the workshop portion, which will go ahead and dive into how we arrived to some of these numbers on the school performance fact sheet. You will need the 2 documents that are on the screen, and those were made available to you during registration or at the beginning of this presentation. We'll go ahead and take a 10-minute break now. You can take that. You do not have to leave the meeting. You can just leave it exactly as it is. You don't have to leave and rejoin. We're just taking a break. Grab some water, some coffee, whatever you need. We'll see you in 10 minutes. Now to get into the next, the second portion of our presentation, which is a workshop, you will need the document that is on your screen, which is an example of a SPIF for a pretend program of ours. And you will also need this document, which we call the colorful document. It has various amounts of data on it. As you can see, this data is our some supporting data. Jennifer covered this in the beginning of the presentation of all the data that you're required to keep. This is just some of it and how it is important in creating your school performance fact sheets, such as student information, which you can see here, the date they started a program, their scheduled completion date, which Jennifer mentioned is very important when completing your school performance fact sheets. Place of employment, date they took their exams, their salary, and things of that nature. But this is 2 sets of information, one for the calendar year of 2019 and another for the calendar year of 2020. Now, this is our sample school performance fact sheet, and Natasha is going to go ahead and get us started in reviewing it. We will start from the top. We are going to cover on-time completion rates, the 150 table, the job placement rates. We're going to cover the 4 gainfully employed categories, which have to do with either being part-time or full-time, single position versus concurrent aggregated position, self-employed, institutional employment. JJ will cover license examination passage rates and how we get these numbers, as well as JJ will also cover the salary and wage information. The remaining information on the SPIFs we went through in the presentation, and they're pretty straightforward, and you can see them here, for example, cost of educational program and the way it should look, the federal student loan debt table, and then the 2 statements that we talked about and the way that page needs to look, the definitions that are required, and the student's right to cancel. So without any I will go ahead and pass it over to Natasha so she can kind of get us started here.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So we're going to go over, like Christina said, the SPIFs and then the supporting docs on how we drafted this information. So we're going to start with the on-time completion rate table. And we're going to start with the 2019 calendar year, okay? So if you look at the on-time completion rate table for 2019, we have 11 students under the number of students who began the program. So we know that number of students who began the program, this means the number of students who began the program who were scheduled to complete the program within 100% of the published program length within the reporting calendar year, and excludes all students who canceled during the cancellation period. So let's go over to our supporting docs and take a look and see how we came up with our 11 students. So we're working with the top part here where it says 2019 program data. So we are going to look at our scheduled completion date. We have a column titled scheduled completion date. So we have a total of 12 students here. So the only student that would not be included would be Janet Coleman. She withdrew on 1/8/2019, and with this scenario, this is within the cancellation period. So minus Janet, that gives us a total of 11 students who were scheduled to complete the program in that reporting year. So like we showed, Janet Coleman, the program start date was that date, and then she canceled. So that's where we show 11 students as number of students who began the program, because they were all scheduled to complete in 2019. Minus Janet gives us 11. Going to the third column, we have students available for graduation. Now we know that everybody's going to be available unless they have passed away, been incarcerated, or called to active military duty. Our supporting docs show that everybody's available. Now let's get to our on-time graduates. So the number of on-time graduates is the number of students who completed the program within 100% of the published program length within the reporting calendar year. And this can be on or before their scheduled completion date. So we identified 6 students. So let's go back to our supporting docs and take a look and see how we came up with that 6. So you're going to see a column titled actual completion date. And you're going to see students that are highlighted in yellow. Okay, those are going to be your on time. So we have Sonia Jones, Donald Everett, Samuel Bradford. Now, as you can see, Samuel completed on July 30th, 2019, and this was before the scheduled completion date. So this person is counted as on time. All right. Ricardo Hernandez, Cynthia Patch, and Victoria Johnson, giving us a total of 6 students under our on-time graduates. And how do we get our rate? So remember, your on-time completion rate is the number of on-time graduates. So your 6 divided by 11 gives you the 55%. Okay. So in this example, we want to use the 150 table. So let's go down to the 150 table, and we're going to start with the 2019 year. Second column is the number of students who began the program. As you can see, I still have 11 students because those were all of my students who were scheduled to complete the program in that reporting year. Okay. Third column, students available for graduation. I still work with my same 11 because nobody passed away, been incarcerated, or called to active military duty. And I identified that in my on time. Now I'm going to identify in the next column my 150. So my 150 graduates would be, is the number of students who completed the program within 150% of the published program length, and this will include on time. So let's go to our supporting docs and take a look and see who is considered the 150. So you will see under actual completion date, you want to look at that column, you're going to see students in green. These are our 150 students. We have Amanda Cortez. We have Mary Lou, Sarah Vang, and we have Ruby Dillon. So with our on time plus our 150, that gives us a total of 10 students. So we can go back to our school performance fact sheet example, and you see 150% graduates as 10, because that included the 6 that were on time plus the 4 that I determined to be within 150, giving me a total of 10 students. Now we look at the rate, which is the 91% rate. I got that rate because it is the number of students who completed the program in the reporting calendar year within 150% of the published program length, including my on-time graduates, and I divide that by the number of students available for graduation, and that will give me my percentage. All right, so now that I have all my graduates, I need to figure out where their job placement, identify if they're working. So let's take a look at our job placement table. You'll see job placement rates. Let's start with 2019 here, and we are going to look at the second column. Number of students who began the program. Still working with my same 11. That number does not change. I'm still working with that same 11 that I identified in the on-time completion rate table, 150 table, and here. Number of graduates. So our number of graduates means the number of students who began the program and have been awarded a degree or diploma. So we identified 10. Okay. Let's go to our graduates available for employment. We identified 10. Now, the only time somebody would be unavailable is if they passed away. After graduation, they passed away, become incarcerated, called to active military duty, are an international student that leaves the United States or does not have a visa for employment in the United States, or is continuing their education in an accredited bureau-approved post-secondary education. Now, one of the things I want to be clear here in this example, this particular example, the students had to take an exam. So basically, after the exam, we identified that if we go to the next column, we identified that there were 4 graduates employed in the field. So remember, graduates employed in the field is after 6 months, they gain employment who's been reported, for whom the institution verifies that employment. Now, for this example, the occupants for which the state requires passing an examination, the 6-month period begins after the announcement of the examination results for the first examination available after the student completes an applicable educational program. So you're going to see that example here. So we identified 4. So let's go to our supporting docs. So what we want to look for is employment date began, which you're going to see in the column there, employment date began. We have Sonia Jones, Donald Everett, Samuel Bradford, and we have Cynthia Patch, giving us a total of 4 students who are employed in the field. And like I said, Jennifer will be going over the exam information after this. So let's go back to our job placement table. Let's take a look at the SPIFs again, because we identified those 4. Let's take a look at our rate. So our rate was 40%, and we got that 40% because we divided the 4 by 10, giving us the 40%. So now that I know I have 4 students who are employed in the field, I need to figure out, based upon the supporting docs that I have, where are they gainfully employed? So I'm going to talk about the first 2 tables. The first 2 tables is my part-time versus full-time, and my single position versus concurrent aggregated position. These tables, we're going to start on the right-hand side, identifies total graduates employed in the field. We talked about this earlier in the slides. I identified that there were 4 students employed in the field, right? Because I identified that in my job placement table. So that number is not changing. In addition to that, for the single position versus concurrent aggregated position, I identified 4 students are employed in the field. So we know that there are 4 students. I'm not adding up my columns from left to right. That's just identifying how many students are employed in the field. So let me talk about the middle columns, and this is based upon the supporting docs that we have. So for 2019, we identified that there were 4 graduates employed in the field, at least working 30 hours per week. In addition to that, we identified in the second table that those graduates employed in the field are working in a single position. Okay, so let's look at our supporting docs to determine how we got that. So I want to start with the hours per week, which is towards the end of this Excel spreadsheet. You'll see it in a light purple. You have hours per week. We have Sonia Jones working 40 hours per week. We have Donald Everett working 40 hours per week. Mary Lou working 34, and Cynthia Patch working 36. So I was able to get my hours. Now I need to identify single position versus concurrent aggregated. So let's take a look here. Under place of employment and position, I have Sonia Jones working in one position as an LVN at Kaiser. Okay. I have Donald Everett as an LVN at Sutter. So it's one position in the field. Mary Lou, LVN, LA General. And then I have Cynthia Patch, LVN at Mercy. So let's go ahead and go back to the school performance fact sheets. So I identified in my supporting docs that I had the 4 who were working at least 30 hours per week in the field. And then I have under my single concurrent aggregated, I have my 4 working in one position. Okay. Let me take you to the last 2 tables. So starting left-hand side, 2019 for self-employed working freelance. The second column, I don't have any supporting docs because basically I didn't have any supporting docs, so you're going to show that as 0. However, total graduates employed in the field was 4 because I already identified that in my job placement table. Going down to the institutional employment table for 2019, left-hand side, starting from the left-hand side, the calendar year 2019, I identified in the middle column that I don't have anybody employed there. So that's why you show 0. However, last column, total graduates employed in the field reflects 4. So that is how you put together those tables. And I'm going to pass it back to Jennifer, and she's going to talk about start off with the licensing examination data.
Thank you, Natasha. So under our SPIFs and starting from the right-hand side, we're looking at the calendar year. We are using the continuously administered table for the year-round exams. And starting with the first column, we have 10 under the number of graduates in the calendar year. We have number of graduates taking exam are 7. Number who passed the first available exam is 4. Number who failed first available exam is 3. And then the passage rate, which we got by dividing the number who passed of 4 by the number of taking of 7 with a passage rate of 57%. So let's look at our supporting documents and see who we have listed. So if you look at the column, first available exam date, you'll see that all of our graduates received their first available exam date. And we have 10 there. Those are our 10. Go to the next column, date exam taken, which is our number of our graduates who took the first available exam, and that is 7. These are our people listed under the light blue column. And let's see who these people are. We have Sonia Jones, Donald Everett, Samuel Bradford, Mary Lou, Ricardo Hernandez, Cynthia Patch, and Victoria Johnson. These are our 7 who took the first available exam, as listed in our school performance fact sheet. Okay, so let's go back to the supporting documentation and let's look at our 4 who actually passed the first available exam. Excuse me. Our 4 who passed the first available exam is Cynthia Jones, Donald Everett, Samuel Bradford, and Cynthia Patch. Now, if you'll notice, Amanda Cortez actually passed the exam. However, her first available exam date was 12/30/19, but she chose not to take the exam until February 1, 2020. Therefore, she can't be counted under your exam results. And there's also those who failed the first available exam. We're gonna go with those who were counted, and those are Samuel Bradford, Ricardo Hernandez, and Victoria Johnson. Those are our three who failed the first available exam as listed in our school performance fact sheet. Let's go back to the supporting docs, and you'll see listed here. We also had two others who failed the exam, but they're not counted because they did not take the first available exam. And those are Sarah Vang and Ruby Dillon. They chose not to take the first available exam, so they're not counted under failed. Okay? So now that we have our graduates are licensed and they've gained employment, we're going to talk about their salary and wage information. So under the salary and wage information, we're going to start with the calendar year. We're looking at the 2019. We have the graduates available for employment. Again, that's bring it over from your job placement table. And your graduates employed in the field are 4, which again, we're bringing over from the job placement table. Okay. Then remember, we're only including the salary and wage increments that actually apply in our tables for the two reporting years. First reporting year for 2019, we have one listed under 45,000 to 50,000. And then we have 3 listed under the 50,000 to 55,000. Let's look at the supporting docs and see who we have for our 45,000 to 50,000. So under the supporting documentation, we have one listed for 45,000 to 50,000, and that's Cynthia Patch earning 50,000 for that reporting year. We had 3 listed earning 50 to 55,000 for the reporting year, and that's Sonia Jones earning 52,000, Donald Everett earning 53,000, and Mary Lou earning 55,000. Those are our earners for our salary and wage table listed here. Notice we have 0 listed under no salary information reported because all 4 of our graduates reported their salary earnings for the reporting year. Now I'm going to give it back to Natasha, and she's going to go over the 2020 year for our on-time graduates.
All right, so we're going to go back up to the top of our school performance fact sheets, and we're going to talk about 2020. So for 2020, we identified that there were 13 number of students who began the program. Now remember, I'm sorry if I keep repeating this, but I want to make sure you understand that the number of students who began the program means the number of students who began the program who were scheduled to complete the program within 100% of the published program length within the reporting calendar year, and excludes all students who canceled during the cancellation period. Let me just go over to the next column there, students available for graduation. Once again, we're working with 13 because I don't have any, my supporting docs don't support anybody who's considered unavailable. So we have 13. So let me take you over to the supporting docs to show you how I came up with my number of students who began the program. All right, so we're down on the second table where it says 2020 program data, vocational nursing, and I'm going to start from the left-hand side. I'm going to look under the column scheduled completion date. So I have a total of 13 students. And in this scenario, I have everyone who was basically considered scheduled to complete the program. So we do have somebody who withdrew, but it's not within the cancellation period. So they're still considered part of the 13. Okay. So let me go back to our supporting docs or our school performance fact sheet. So we have 13 and 13 again under students available for graduation. Now we have 8 for our number of on-time graduates. So number of on-time graduates is the number of students who completed the program within 100% of the published program length within the reporting calendar year on or before their scheduled completion day. So let's go back to our supporting docs and take a look and see who we have for our total of 8. So moving on to the next column, we identified our on-time grads underneath a column titled actual completion date. And you're going to see those students highlighted in yellow. We have Mamie Washington, Fanny Clark, Dawn Cooper, Frank Costa, Rhonda Duncan, Julia Castro, Frank Garcia, and Teresa Howe, giving us a total of 8 students who completed on time, on or before. I'm sorry, go back to the supporting docs for me. We had 1 student who completed before. So if you look at Julia Castro, you'll see 7/26/2020. She actually completed before her scheduled completion date, but she's still considered on time. Okay. So go back to the school performance fact sheet. So we have our 8, and that gives us our 62% because we divide that 8 by our 13, and we get 62%. So now we want to go down to our 150 table for 2020. Let's start from the left-hand side. So 2020, we have number of students who began the program, 13. I already know that 13 because I already identified that in my on-time table. So I'm still working with the same students. Students available for graduation, 13. Already identified that in my on-time table. So I'm still working with that same number. Now you're going to see the difference in my 150 graduates, because remember, your 150 graduates is the number of students who completed the program within the 150% of the program length, which includes your on-time graduates. So let's go to our supporting docs and let me show you how I came up with that 11 students. So I'm still working under the column titled actual completion date, but I've identified my 150 graduates because I have them in green. So I have Ulysses Jones, Sherilyn Hunt, and Judah Way. So I have my 8 students plus my 3 who are considered 150, giving me a total of 11 students that I can count under my 150% graduates. So I take that 11, divide that by my 13, and I get 85%. Okay. All right, so now that we know who's completed in 2020, we now want to take it down to our job placement table to identify who is employed in the field. So let's start from the left-hand side. 2020 reporting year. We have our 13 students. We already know who that is. That's that same cohort that we started with in our on-time table. Number of graduates, we identified that in our on-time completion rate as well as the 150, because our number of graduates means the number of students who began the program and have been awarded a degree or diploma. Okay. Graduates available for employment. In this scenario, everybody's available for employment because we don't have any supporting docs to say that they are not unavailable. Remember, in this scenario, all of these students had to take an exam, so we determined that 6 students are employed in the field. So let's take a look at our supporting docs to see how I came up with those 6. So we are going to take a look at the column titled Employment Date Began. Okay, so we are going to start with Mamie Washington, and it's highlighted in the light orange. Mamie Washington, Fanny Clark, you're going to see 2 dates here, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We have Ulysses Jones. We have Frank Costa, Julia Castro, and Teresa Howe, giving me a total of 6 students who are employed in the field. Okay, so we know that we have 6 students who are employed in the field. All right, based upon the total here. So Mamie Washington, Fanny Clark, Ulysses Jones, Frank Costa, Julia Castro, and Teresa Howe. So let's go back to our school performance fact sheets, please. Now that I've identified my students who are employed in the field, I need to figure out where they're going to be gainfully employed. So let's focus on that 4 and 6, okay? Any table that has total graduates employed in the field is going to identify 4 for 2019 and 6 for 2020. You will see that in all of these gainfully employed tables. Okay, I'm not adding up these columns from left to right. It was already identified that for those reporting years, I had 4 students who were employed in the field for 2019 and 2020. I had 6. Okay, so I want to talk about the middle column now. I'm going to talk about the first table, part-time versus full-time employment for 2020. Let's start from the second column in that table where we identified 1 student who was working at least 20 to 29 hours per week for 2020. And then I identified 5 students who were at least working 30 hours per week. Okay, so I have my part-time and full-time. Now I need to figure out if they're working at 1 job or 2 jobs. So if we go down to the second table, let's go back to the scripts. If we go down to the second table, for 2020, we identified that there were 5 students who are employed in 1 position. And then we had a total of 1 student who is working in 2 positions in the same field. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I came up with that number. So I want to start with the hours first. So we're going to start on the right-hand side, okay? So I have Mamie Washington, 40 hours. I have Fanny Clark working 20 hours as well as working 9. Combining that equals 29 hours, okay? I have Ulysses Jones working 40. I have Frank Costa working 40. Julia Castro working 30. And Teresa Howe working 40. Okay, so I've already identified my hours. Now I'm going to go to the second part, which is we're identifying part-time versus a single position versus concurrent aggregated. So let's go over to place of employment and position. So we have Mamie Washington. She's working at Kaiser as an LVN. Fanny Clark is working as an LVN, but working at 2 different places, BVNPT and UC Davis. That's why you show the 2 employment dates as well as those hours. Okay. And I'm combining the hours to 29 hours, and then she's working in a concurrent aggregated position as an LVN. So she's working at 2 jobs as an LVN. Going down to Ulysses Jones is an LVN at Kaiser. Frank Costa is an LVN at a convalescent home. We have Julia Castro is an LVN at Sutter. And Teresa Howe is an LVN at Kaiser. So let's go back to our supporting docs, the school performance fact sheets. So I was able to show you how I identified those students as being employed in part-time versus full-time, as well as single position versus current aggregated. Okay. So let's go to the next page. Middle columns for 2020. I do not have any supporting docs for my self-employed and freelance. That's why you see 0 there. But to the right of that, I still have 6 total graduates employed in the field because I identified that in my job placement table. Going down to institutional employment, middle column for 2020. I don't have any supporting docs for this, so I show 0. However, last column identifies total graduates employed in the field was 6 because we identified that already in our job placement table. So that completes the job placement information. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Jennifer to start with the licensing exam data.
Thank you, Natasha. So looking at the SPIFs under the 2020 calendar year, we have number of graduates in the 20 year is 11. Number of graduates taking the exam is 11. Number who passed first exam is 8. Number who failed first exam is 3. And then the passage rate of 73%. We got the 73% by dividing the number who passed the first available exam, which is 8, by the number taking the first available exam, which is 11. That gives you 73%. So let's look at our supporting docs and see who actually took the exam and who passed and failed the exam. So under the 2020 year, we have, excuse me, we have 11 who actually received the first available exam. Okay. Of those 11, all 11 took the first available exam. That's all of our light blue colors right here. Of those 11, 8 passed the first available exam. Let's identify who those 8 are. That's Mamie Washington, Fannie Clark, Ulysses Jones, Sherilyn Hunt, Frank Costa, Rhonda Duncan, Julia Castro, and Teresa Howe. Those are our 8 graduates who passed the first available exam, as listed here in our school performance fact sheet. So let's go back to the supporting docs. I want to point something out. You notice we have 8 who passed the exam, but only 6 are reported as gainfully employed. If you look at Sherilyn Hunt, you'll see date employment began with 6/12/21. That's past the 6-month period that the examination results were announced. For this sample, this workshop purposes, we're saying the exam results were announced the same day that she passed the exam. So from September to June, that's past the 6-month period. Therefore, she couldn't be counted in the gainfully employed categories. Also, we have Rhonda Duncan, who actually gained employment within the 6-month period. However, if you look at her hours per week, she only worked 10 hours per week. That's less than the part-time. Therefore, she can be counted under any of the gainfully employed categories. Okay. So now let's look at those who failed the exam. We have Don Cooper, Huda Way, and Frank Garcia. Those are our 3 who failed the first available exam as listed in the school performance fact sheets. Okay. Now let's look at our salary and wage tables. Starting from the left side of your school performance fact sheet on page 4, you'll start with the 2020 year. We have 11 graduates available for employment as listed in your job placement table. Graduates employed in the field is 6 as listed in the job placement table. And then we have our salary and wage increments, which again, we're only reporting the categories that actually apply, the columns that actually apply in the salary and wage table. We have 2 under 30 to 35,000, 1 under 45 to 50,000, and 3 under 50 to 55,000. Okay, so let's look at our supporting documentation to see who our earners are in the supporting docs. Under the 2020 year, again, we had 2 who earned 30 to 35,000. The first one we have is Fannie Clark. Fannie Clark actually worked 2 jobs. She earned a total of 35,000 for the year. So we're going to combine her income and make that 35,000. I went out of order. I'm sorry, Christia. The other person who earned in our 30 to 35,000 was Julia Castro, who earned $31,000 for the reporting year. Then we have the one person who earned $45,000 to $50,000, and that was Teresa Howe, who earned $45,100 for the reporting year. And then we have three who earned our $50,000 to $55,000, and that is Mamie Washington, who earned $51,000, Ulysses Jones, who earned $53,000, and Frank Costa, who earned $55,000. Those are our earners for the 2020 year. If you notice on the far right of these supporting documentation, we have a column here that we've added to verify the salary and wage information. That's where you can list the date the information was verified, okay? Or the number of attempts that you made to contact the student or employer to verify the information. This table that we're using here is just an example of the Excel spreadsheet that we can use to verify the information. I think someone asked if there was a template. This is what it looks like. We can send you something that's similar to this with the columns we have listed if you send an email request. Now, are there any questions regarding the information we just went over?
Thank you, JJ and Natasha. I do see, I think I saw one or two questions.
Talks about the length of the program.
Yes. Is there an assumed length of the program in your example? Does the length of the program, for example, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year matter? If so, how?
So go back to this fifth. Go back. Yeah, so if you look at the length of the program is 1,628 hours. This is in this example, this program is 1,628 hours. And when I guess this is, does the length of the program 1 year, 2 year, 3 years matter? It does, because it's based upon what you were approved for. So if your program was approved for a year, then you need to report that as vocational, whatever the program is, 1 year. If it's 20 hours, it shall reflect that. But you should have something that shows what your institution was approved to offer at the time when you were approved. And that's the length that we're referring to when we talk about program length.
I hope we answered your question. If we misunderstood it, just go ahead and send like a clarifying chat, and we'll go ahead and address it that way. The next question was how to handle when there is no exact exam available date. It all depends when students register and schedule by the exam center.
If there's no exact, there should be, how do I say this? Okay, if it's a continuously administered exam, you won't report an exact date. You're going to report your number of graduates taking the exam for that reporting year. The only time you're reporting an exact date is if it's a program that's offered, licensing exam offered only 2 to 3 times per year. That's when you'll report the exact date, such as for your attorneys, your CPAs, your dental hygienists. Those programs offer licensing exams 2 to 3 times per year, and you'll list them as the example in our school performance fact sheet. If you can go to that, I'm sorry, it's in the presentation. It's not in the school performance fact sheet. But in the presentation, there is an example of what not continuously administered exam licensing table should look like. I'm not sure. Do the participants receive this presentation?
Yes, they received it along with all the other material.
Okay, so if you look at page 50 and page, let's see, page 50 of your presentation, it shows you how it should be set up, as well as page 53 of the presentation that shows you what a not continuously administered exam table, how it should be formatted for your school performance fact sheet. Otherwise, you would use the continuously administered where you're counting your graduates throughout the year who are taking the exam.
It's up on the screen,
Answered your
JJ.
question. This is what the continuously administered should, how it should be formatted. And then slide 53 is for your not continuously administered, and where you're listing the specific date of the exam and the specific date of the exam results. I hope I answered that for you.
She said she got it. She said she got it.
Okay, great.
Okay, and then let me go back to the next question. Where should we place the verbatim for situational information new program on the SPIFs? Right below the on-time completion rates graduation table as the sample provided, or at the very end before the definitions as the performance fact sheet template? I believe, JJ, you said that they can place it right here where my laser pointer is at the moment.
Correct. You can place it under your on-time table stating that it's a new program.
And the next question is, our state licensing exam used to be a specific date twice a year. Now it's digital and students are taking it whenever. So we can track the passing rate only based on what the students report.
Okay, so then in that case, if they're taking it throughout the year, you're going to use the continuously administered and you'll report the data that you receive.
Okay, I'm gonna go and move on to the next question. The next question is to clarify, and this one has a few parts. So I'm gonna make sure to read it as clear as I can. To clarify, if we were to obtain supporting docs confirming the graduate was working at least 30 hours per week within 6 months of getting licensed, but refused to provide salary, they can be counted as placed, right? But if we cannot verify their number of hours worked per week, they cannot be considered placed, even though we have supporting docs for everything else.
I have a question about that, Christina, because I've ran into that before. I've seen it where schools have provided the, like you said, the hours and single versus part-time and working one position or not, but they don't have any salary to report. I've never seen it where they have the salary, but they're working.
Okay.
So,
Well, it sounds like a unique, not
Yeah.
a unique, but it's not, it doesn't happen all the time. So this sounds like a situational,
mhm.
very institution specific question. So, Yuto, if you can send that question to us and we'll go ahead and ask you any clarifying questions and make sure we get you the correct information.
Mhm.
The next one is, so we can just skip the questions.
I think she answered later saying, got it, thanks.
Got it. Okay.
Oh.
Okay, got it. Next question is, so if it is a 2-year program, the students who will be available for graduation in 2019 would have begun the program in 2017?
Most likely, correct. If it's a 2-year program, then yeah, they would be scheduled to complete the program at some point in 2019. So that would be your number of students who began the program. They were scheduled to complete in 2019.
And then, here we go. What if the student is in 2 positions at the same company, say trainer and training manager? Is she in a single position or a concurrent aggregated position?
Wait, how she's working we don't have a category for that. 'Cause that's the same position, not working it's two different types of positions. So she's a trainer or this person is a trainer and a training manager. That sounds like it would be concurrent aggregated because it's two jobs in the same field. Correct, Jennifer?
Correct. If she's earning two
Mhm.
two salaries, then she would be counted in the concurrent aggregated.
Correct, yeah.
I don't see any, oh,
So same salary as one.
Not sure of the question.
One position.
If the employee is earning only one salary for the two positions, it's only one position. If she's earning two different paychecks for two different positions in the same company, you're gonna count her in your concurrent aggregated and list it as we did Fanny Clark.
Yeah.
Yeah, as we listed Fanny Clark in the supporting documentation.
Mhm.
okay. I see a hand up from Yvonne. Welcome, Wendy, and let me unmute Yvonne so that she can ask her question. Hi, Yvonne.
Hi. So we opened in April of 2019, and the report shows that you have to report 2 years, right? So would I just not report 2019 and do 2020 and 2021?
No, you still have, I think we've talked before, but the 2019 year is not going to have any data because you just opened, correct? So there's nothing to report, correct?
Well, we did have students that from April to December of 2019.
Were they scheduled to complete in that reporting year? That's what you need to
Some,
identify.
some did, yes.
Okay, then if you have students that were scheduled to complete in that reporting year, then you'll have data because 2019 is asking you to reflect the number of students who began the program. So remember that those are your students who were scheduled to complete in that reporting year, so 2019. So you have a few students who were scheduled to complete in 2019, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, then you'll have data for 2019, and it sounds like you'll probably have data for 2020 as well.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Bless you.
Bless you.
Okay, I don't see any more questions coming through the chat, and I don't see any more hands.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and give it maybe a minute or two. And in the meantime, I'll put up our slide with our contact information. If anyone wants to send information directly to us, if you have an institution specific question or something that maybe you didn't send through the chat and want to send it through an email, you can send it to our general inbox, which is on the screen. It is monitored daily, so you should receive a response, even if we have to look into it. And with that, that concludes our presentation/workshop. We'll stick around. Yeah, we'll stick around. Thank you. Thank you, JJ and Natasha, and thank you everyone for attending and for the questions. We'll stick around, and if you're, if you want to exit out, you can just leave the event. But we'll stick around just in case there are any questions. You're welcome, Megan and Victoria. And Wendy, thank you.